self-sufficient expeditionary force installed with a warrior ethos that equates the efficient use of vital resources with increased combat effectiveness. So there's a direct relationship now, combat effectiveness and fuel efficiency. And their mission is, by 2025, we will deploy this expeditionary force that can maneuver sea and sustain its C4I, right, command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence, and life support systems in place. The only liquid fuel needed will be for mobility systems, which will be energy efficient, right, just to get us there. And the target is 50% reduction in gallons per Marine on the battlefield, right? So I think you can get the gist of my 3 main points that I'm going to make tonight. The first is that energy security for the military is 3 C's. It's about cost, it's about combat, and it's also about climate. The second is the U.S. military is now moving out on targets set back in 2001. And the third is DoD is hampered by, but I should say, DoD is still hampered by culture, by science and technology, and by procurements. And I'll go through each of these now. Right, so the 3 C's. Cost control. This, by the way, this is mine. This is not from a DoD document. I'll tell you when things are from documents. But I see it as cost control first, from listening to Mavis and others give speeches, Secretary of the Navy. Reliable supply at predictable cost. Combat effectiveness. You want to limit losses and enhance options. And then the climate as a future cause of conflict and mitigation. Okay? So, the U.S. military is the largest consumer of oil in the United States, right? I said the government was the largest procurer of oil. The United States is first for oil consumption in the world per capita. China's first, but the United States is first per capita. So that makes the U.S. military what? It's the greatest oil consumer in the world, right? Of federal energy use, DoD accounts for 80%. In 2010, 70% of the cost of DoD energy use and 75% of the amount of energy purchased was for military operations. DoD consumes 300,000 barrels of oil a day. And last year, the energy budget for the U.S. Air Force reached $13.4 billion. 72% of that went for fuel for operation energy. Basically, the Air Force burns roughly as much as United Airlines. And besides the cost, why does this matter to the U.S. military? Because getting oil to the battlefield costs lives. It's become a killer. Just in the past decade, the fuel requirements for the battlefield has exponentially increased. There are more computers, more radios that need power. 60% of power in Afghanistan is for C4I. Vehicles are heavier than in 2001. They require more fuel. In this picture, you see soldiers wait for cans of fuel airdropped in. This just from January 2011. And getting fuel to the front line is dangerous. In this picture, you see Pakistani drivers in these burnt-out tankers. They were on their way to Afghanistan. This is in Islamabad. So in early 2007, General Petraeus' team out in Iraq recognized this. They recognized that there was a major problem that were becoming increasingly more evident, that fuel trucks were being targeted by Iraqi insurgents, and as a result, the soldiers and contractors driving these trucks were being killed at alarming rates. And they asked, what can be done to reduce the number of trucks on the road? 80% of those fuel trucks were carrying fuel specifically for generating air conditioning units at non-insulated structures such as tents, trailers, buildings. 80% of the fuel. So you've got people dying for air conditioning, right? So they did a demonstration, and they came up with a company, this Sinovision Solutions, that could, and it was actually a consortium of companies that sprayed foam, polyurethane foam, on the tents. 92% reduction in electrical energy needed to cool the structure. $1 billion saved annually. Okay, and you ask, why not before, right? I don't know why not before, but it's interesting that it came up in Iraq in 2007 under General Petraeus. So let me just show you a graphic here then. Deloitte, Deloitte, it's a major international consulting firm, did a study on DoD. and energy security at the end of last year. And they have this chart in their report. And they say for the operation in Afghanistan, starting in FY fiscal year 02, Deloitte links the IED casualties to fuel trucks. They make the argument that as demand for fuel increased, so too did the number of casualties from IEDs through fiscal year 09. And actually, at this point in fiscal year 09, the number of casualties is much higher in Afghanistan than it was in Iraq. And they see a very dangerous trajectory if business as usual continues. Deloitte also had this slide. This fully burdened cost of fuel was first put in basically the Defense Authorization Act from the U.S. Congress. What does it mean? It means that in Afghanistan, the cost of getting a barrel of oil to the soldier is much higher than we pay down at the gasoline station. Right? That's pretty obvious, but it wasn't accounted for that way in the Department of Defense budget. So in Afghanistan alone, the U.S. military burns 800,000 gallons of fuel a day, 800,000. So the cost of moving a gallon of gas down the supply line, they estimated, to the gas tank of a deployed Humvee or a helicopter, can easily run $100 a gallon. Right? How much do we pay per gallon right down in our local? Right, $100 per gallon. Or consider this, generators provide the majority of power in the field. I told you this already, that the majority of this is going towards generation in Afghanistan, 60%. They run on fuel. A 10 kilowatt generator burns roughly a gallon per hour. So a low base case of about $14 per gallon, delivered cost of $1.40 per kilowatt just for fuel. With system costs, this is about $2 per kilowatt, right? A lot more than we pay per kilowatt for our electricity. And as a result, the U.S. Marine Corps ordered the very first battlefield audit of energy use in August 2009. Very first ever. Okay. So there's a report out by the Center for Naval Analysis, and it's got all these esteemed generals signing it, right? They're all retired, as you can see, RET after their name. They represent all the services. And they got together and they did a study and they issued a report. And I want to read you a little bit. So General Kern, General Paul J. Kern, anybody know who he is? What's he famous for? Right? He's famous for that famous left swoop around to Kuwait, right? I mean, around to Iraq to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. So let me read you what he says. He says, right, in 1991, General Kern commanded the 2nd Brigade of the 24th Infantry Division in its advance towards Baghdad, a sweeping left hook around Kuwait and up the Euphrates River. It involved 5,000 people, plus material support across 150 kilometers of desert. This is Operation Desert Storm, right? So here he is. This is a symbol. That's what he's leading. So he says, quote, as we considered the route and began planning, our biggest concern was not our ability to fight the Iraqis. Not our ability to fight the Iraqis. What do you think it was? What's that?
Keep things fueled?
Yeah.
I mean, tanks take a lot of gas.
Yeah. We also made a decision to never let our tanks get below full because we didn't want to refuel in the middle of the fight. So meeting this commitment, giving the fuel efficiency of the Abrams tanks required stopping every 2.5 hours. Fueling was done with 2,250-gallon fuel tankers, which were returned were refueled by 5,000-gallon line haul tankers. That's like we see on the highway. We set up and moved out in a tactical configuration and were ready to fight whenever necessary, General Kern says. To refuel, we would stop by battalions and companies. As we advanced, we laid out a system with roughly 15 stations for refueling. This was occurring almost continuously. We did it at night in blinding sandstorms. The point of all this is that logistics demands for fuel are so significant, they drive tactical planning. They determine how you fight.